In early 2026, the world's most critical energy chokepoint went dark, but China saw it coming. For years, they quietly spent $400 billion building a backdoor, a ghost port sitting just outside the strait, designed so that if this moment came, China's oil wouldn't stop moving. The ghost port of Jask. Most people have never heard of Jask. Small town, Iran's southern coast, a few thousand people. In 2021, something extraordinary happened here. Iran inaugurated a 1,000-kilometer pipeline cutting straight through the desert from its inland oil fields to a brand new export terminal right on this coast, the Goreh-Jask pipeline, designed to carry 1 million barrels of oil per day. Now, why does that matter? Because Jask sits just outside the Strait of Hormuz. Every other major Iranian oil terminal, including Karg Island, which handles roughly 90% of Iran's exports, sits deep inside the Persian Gulf, behind the strait. If the strait closes, Karg Island is useless. But Jask is already free. In that same year, China and Iran signed a 5-year cooperation agreement, widely reported to involve hundreds of billions in Chinese investment in exchange for discounted Iranian oil. Jask was the crown jewel of that deal. The plan was clean. Iranian oil flows to Jask bypassing the strait, gets loaded onto tankers, sails across the Arabian Sea, arrives at Gwadar in Pakistan, also outside the strait, then moves overland through Chinese-built infrastructure all the way into western China. Start to finish. Not a single mile inside the Strait of Hormuz. On paper, one of the most elegant strategic moves in modern history. So what went wrong? Everything. The 2021 inauguration was premature. Equipment rushed into service before testing was done. Storage tanks weren't ready. The single loading buoy installed started leaking crude almost immediately. For years, the terminal loaded oil only sporadically, sometimes going months with zero exports. By late 2024, Iran had quietly stopped loading from Jask altogether. When the 2026 Hormuz crisis hit, the exact scenario this terminal was built for, Jask managed just a handful of shipments, a trickle. The International Energy Agency officially rated it not a viable crude export option. A $2 billion project, a decade of strategic planning, and when the moment came, the ghost port was still a ghost. Why China built this? China needs 11 million barrels of oil every single day just to keep the economy running. And roughly half of that transits the Strait of Hormuz, only 40 kilometers wide at its narrowest, with Iran controlling one side. About 20% of all the oil consumed on Earth flows through it daily. One closure, and global energy markets go into freefall. Beijing strategists call this the Malacca dilemma, the idea that China's greatest vulnerability isn't on land or in the air, it's a shipping lane. Shut that lane down, and you can bring the world's second largest economy to its knees without any direct confrontation whatsoever. In any serious standoff over Taiwan, over the South China Sea, cutting off China's energy supply is a pressure point more powerful than any trade deal or diplomatic threat. So the logic behind Jask, behind Gwadar, behind the whole $26 billion CPEC corridor, it was never just about trade. It was about survival. Survival. That's what all of this comes down to, and stories with stakes this high take a serious amount of time to dig into properly. If this kind of research is worth something to you, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link right at the top of the description or in the pinned comment. No subscription, no pressure. Just a way to help keep these documentaries going. Even one coffee makes a real difference. Now, because Jask was only half of what China actually built, the other half was Gwadar. And 20 years ago, it was nothing more than a fishing village. Gwadar was a fishing village on Pakistan's southwestern coast. A few boats, nothing else. Today it's a deep-water megaport, a free trade zone, and an emerging city, all financed by China. New berths capable of docking supertankers. A brand new international airport will be completed in 2024. Hospitals, housing, power plants. China has directly invested around $26 billion into the broader CPEC corridor, connecting Gwadar all the way to Xinjiang. The critical thing about Gwadar's location, it sits on the Arabian Sea, outside the strait, on the free side, just like Jask. The vision was a seamless chain. Iranian oil exits through Jask, sails across to Gwadar, then travels overland through Pakistan into western China. No contested sea lanes, no choke points. The port is functional. Ships are arriving, but the overland oil pipeline from Gwadar into Xinjiang, the critical final link, is still not complete. The bypass exists in pieces, not as a working system. And here's why that pipeline isn't finished yet. The terrain. The route from Gwadar to Xinjiang crosses the Karakoram Range, some of the most extreme landscape on Earth. Building through it is extraordinarily expensive. Keeping it operational is harder. Protecting it from interference is a challenge unlike anything China has faced before on land. The security crisis. Baluchistan, the Pakistani province Gwadar sits in, has a long-running separatist conflict. Local groups see Chinese development as an occupation of their land and resources. There have been attacks on Chinese workers, project convoys, and targeted incidents against project leadership. Pakistan has deployed tens of thousands of security personnel just to keep construction moving. This is not a construction site with a safety problem. It's a construction site wrapped in a full security crisis. The sanctions wall. Iran is under heavy international sanctions. Chinese companies have had to work around this shadow tankers, oil shipments relabeled through third countries, smaller intermediary firms to obscure transactions. It functions, but it limits the scale of everything that can be built. Pakistan's economic collapse, multiple IMF bailouts, a currency that lost more than half its value, political instability. China has renegotiated CPEC repayment terms multiple times. What was sold as an equal partnership increasingly resembles the debt cycle critics warned about, and that tension has slowed construction across the board. What 2026 actually proved. So when the Strait actually closed in early 2026, what happened to China? It survived, but not because the bypass worked. China had built up roughly 1.4 billion barrels of strategic reserves, about 4 months of cover. Saudi Arabia and the UAE quietly rerouted some supply through Red Sea pipelines. Iranian oil kept moving through shadow tankers and floating storage across Asia. The bypass, Jask, Gwadar, the pipeline contributed nothing in 2026. The reserves bought China everything. Jask failed because it was rushed. The Gwadar pipeline was never completed. What 2026 proved is that stockpiles are a temporary cushion and a physical bypass is the only permanent solution. That lesson is going to accelerate everything China builds next. The bigger play. China is executing this same strategy across the entire world. Ports in Sri Lanka, Djibouti, Greece, Tanzania, Argentina, pipelines through Central Asia, railways across East Africa. Over $1 trillion invested across more than 150 countries under Belt and Road. Every project is the same move. Reduce dependence on sea lanes China doesn't control. Build overland routes instead. Create a parallel global infrastructure network that runs on China's own terms. The United States built its post-war influence on controlling the world's oceans. China is systematically building around that on land, one corridor at a time. The Jask ghost port isn't a failure of vision, it's a proof of concept that ran into execution problems, and China has never, in its modern history, walked away from a project because execution was hard. In fact, when China hits an impossible engineering challenge, they don't simplify it. They build something even more audacious to solve it. Jask was supposed to be the answer. It is not yet ready. Gwadar is rising but incomplete. The pipeline China needs most is still a line on a map. But there's a project almost nobody outside the energy world is watching that could make all of this irrelevant. Iraq's development road. A $17 billion corridor from a new deepwater port on the Persian Gulf, straight northwest through Iraq and Turkey, all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. 3 continents connected. Every contested sea lane was bypassed entirely, and China has been quietly circling it for years. If it gets built, it's bigger than Gwadar, more consequential than Jask, and it permanently rewrites how global trade moves. And if you made it this far, thank you. These documentaries take a lot of time to research, write, and produce, but I love making them. If you want to help support the channel, you can make a small donation through the first link in the description or the pinned comment. No pressure at all, but every bit genuinely helps keep more videos like this coming. Now, while you wait for the Iraq Development Road episode, there's something else China built that will stop you in your tracks just as fast. You've seen how China tried to move oil around mountains. Well, they also built a machine to move entire ships over them. It's called a ship elevator, and what China engineered makes every other infrastructure project look modest. That video is linked right below or find it in the pinned comment. See you there.